Once there was a terrible, nasty, mean giant. He hadn't always been such a monster. He'd started off as a somewhat shy creature because he was afraid of being hurt. He was afraid of dragons, of larger giants. Even a farmer with a pitchfork frightened him. But then one day, a wandering wizard came by who told him that he could make it so the giant would never be hurt again. With his magical powers, he pulled the giant's heart out of his chest, put it into a special leather pouch, and flew it far away where it came to rest on the highest branch of the tallest tree of the highest mountain at the far eastern edge of the world. As long as his heart was in that pouch and safe, the giant could never be harmed. But what the wizard didn't tell him was, without his heart, the giant would be, well, heartless. Yes, he no longer feared being hurt, but he no longer cared about anybody else either. He would grab what he wanted, he'd smash what he didn't. He began to attack farms, villages, even the royal city itself. The king called out all of his men, but they could do nothing. As long as that heart was in that pouch, on that branch, on that tree, on that mountain, the giant was safe. The little kingdom only got a respite when the giant would wander off into a neighboring kingdom, or perhaps sleep in his forest cave for a week, a month, a few years. And the story of the heartless giant became the kind of story that you tell to children to keep them away from the forest and safe. And so it was told to one brother and sister. John and Maria lived with their grandmother on a farm in a small cottage there on the edge of the forest. But for them, it was the most wonderful of tales. They would beg their grandmother for more and more stories. They spent hours playing games of giant hunting and thinking of what they would do if they could ever get a hold of the heartless giant. Years passed, they grew up, and their grandmother, very old and very sick, took to her bed. She called them to her bedside and said, "When I am gone, there is one more story you need to know of the giant's heart. Take the little yellow bird that I keep in the cage here in my room. Release it and follow it, for it will take you to the giant's heart, and so you will make your fortune in this world." John and Maria were absolutely amazed at this addition to the story, but they promised their grandmother they would do as she asked, and when she was gone, they talked about it long into the night. It was decided that John would stay with the farm, and Maria would follow the little yellow bird. So the next morning they got up early, released the bird, and it flew once, twice, 3 times around Maria's head, and then off to the east. It rested on a branch and waited till she caught up with it, and then flew a little further and a little further. John watched as his sister and the bird disappeared, and then went back into his house. Maria followed the little bird, became her only companion as she wandered for weeks, months, always to the east, following the little bird over forest and field, hill and valley. It sang her to sleep every night. It woke her up in the morning. And then, after a journey of a year and a day, she found herself standing at the foot of the tallest tree there on the highest mountain, and looking so far up she could see the leather pouch that held the giant's heart. She could never climb up to it, but the little yellow bird flew up and began to batter itself against the pouch until down, 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 down it fell into Maria's waiting hands. She scarcely noticed as the little bird came back and flew once, twice, 3 times around her head, and then headed to the south. For the bird's job was done. Its journey was now its own, and it was released. Now it was Maria's turn to make the journey alone. She opened the bag and examined the heart. It was much smaller, lighter, colder than she'd expected, hard as a stone, cold as ice. Such a little thing to have caused so much pain in the world. She put it back into the leather pouch and thought about her journey home. Back at home, John was doing fairly well, but he was lonely. He missed his grandmother. He missed Maria. So he went into town more often to seek companionship, and he found it. An old friend, Susanna, the daughter of one of the other farmers. Companionship became courtship, and courtship blossomed into an engagement. And within a few months, the two of them were married. They were very happy in their cottage on the farm, and just about the time of their first anniversary, Susanna presented John with a special gift, a baby daughter. They called her Mary Ann, partially in honor of her absent aunt. John almost never spoke of Maria, but every night, as he came in for the evening, he looked back to the dark skies of the east and wondered how safe his dear sister was. Maria was actually doing fairly well. She missed the companionship of the little yellow bird, and at first she berated the heart for all of the anguish it had caused and all the terrible things that the giant had done, but anger can only take you so far. Besides, it wasn't really the heart's fault. She began talking more of what a great place it had been growing up in the little kingdom and how much she missed her family and friends. She also noticed that the heart was beginning to change. As she came down out of the mountain, it seemed larger, warmer, softer. And the longer she journeyed, the more it seemed to change, and she began to have her doubts about what would happen when she got home. Now back at home, though things had changed, the little kingdom was no longer peaceful because the giant was on the move. Day by day, he got closer to the little village. The little family moved into town, hoping that there would be more safety in numbers, but still the giant came. And then one night, with the bonfires burning around it, the giant broke through the barriers, smashing and snatching things up, and he snatched up Susanna and the baby. John, in a desperate attempt to save his little family, raised his knife and came charging when suddenly there was a voice from the edge of the town called out, "Stop! Let those people go!" All the village, even the giant, turned, and there, just inside the line of light, stood Maria, home from a journey of 2 days and 2 years, and holding in her 2 hands the now larger, beating giant's heart. John cried out to her, "Crush it while you can! Kill it! That's my family!" Maria stood and held the heart aloft. The giant carefully put down the mother and child and turned towards Maria. "Kill it now!" John cried. But Maria stood like a statue, holding the heart aloft. Carefully, the giant reached out and plucked the beating heart from her hands. He clutched it to his chest, and a look of great peace and wonder came over his face, and then a look of anguish, as if all the horrors he had perpetrated came down on him in one crushing blow. And with a cry, he turned and fled into the forest and into the darkness, and never returned to the village again. There was great rejoicing in the town that night, and Maria was had the parties, the feast, all sorts of things, all the companionship she had missed for so long she had, and the kingdom celebrated over the next few weeks. The giant, well, no one heard of him again, only in passing, perhaps as a sound of thunder as he walked by, but over the next 50 years, he found his way to make his peace with the kingdom. For if there was a landslide or a tree that fell over one of the king's roads, it was gone by the next day. And no highwayman or thief dared bother any traveler in the kingdom's roads. And for a few days every summer, Maria would go out and camp in the forest. And the people would smile and leave her alone, for they believed during those few days she once again talked to the giant's heart.